A lot of my work, as in addition to teaching about the history of the NAACP, just for the sole fact that they could understand where they come from, they could understand the legacy of the NAACP. In addition to that, it's about helping them pave the way to create their own new future.
Hello, I'm Bonnie Urbay. Welcome to the Contrary. This week, we continue our Women Thought Leader series. We are here with Tiffany Dena Loftin, Director of the NAACP Youth and College Division. She serves more than 700 youth councils and high school and college chapters in her role. Welcome, Tiffany.
Thank you, Bonnie,
for being
having
here.
me. Absolutely.
Good to see you.
Glad to be here.
Well, let's start with, so you're running the youth division of the NAACP.
Yes.
How well in tune with, educated about the incredible history of your organization and its impact on African Americans gaining civil rights are young African Americans aware of?
I think that's a great question. Glad to be here. There are folks who learn a lot about our civil rights history and the significant role in the NAACP's leadership and movement in our history of America. So it's not just civil rights history, it's history of America in classes, in our classroom, across the country, in public schools. I'm a graduate of all public schools from Los Angeles, California. And our folks who learn about the NAACP don't learn about the institution and its entirety and the role that we played not only in the civil rights movement, but also in today's movement. When we talk about Black Lives Matter, we talk about Rodney Reed case, talking about voter suppression, when we talk about Stacey Abrams' race in Georgia, or when we talk about things like fighting for equality education, things that the NAACP has done today, folks might not be as aware of. But folks are very aware that the NAACP has played a huge role in our history, not only towards equity and equality, but also about just economic and racial justice in this country alone.
If there are 3 or 4 things that you think all people in America should know, and particularly young people of color, that the NAACP is responsible for making into history, what would they be?
The first thing that I would say is that it's really important folks understand and know their right to use their First Amendment right has been protected and fought for by the NAACP in our history in multiple cases, in Jackson, Mississippi, in Greensboro, North Carolina, most recently with Baltimore, Maryland, after the Freddie Gray murder, and students and young folks taking to the streets to demand justice for Freddie Gray. There are cases and Supreme Court cases that have been tried and heard by the NAACP that protects folks' voices and their ability to go out and march and protest in the first place. So that's one. Our ability to be able to show up in our agency and demand that people power is what folks see, or that folks pay attention to people power. The NAACP has stood behind that right for generations and since its institution. The second thing that I would say is voter disenfranchisement has been a huge thing, obviously, in the last couple of years. And most recently, the NAACP has fought in places like Georgia, where voters actually got to the polls and there were ballot boxes that they could not plug up, or there weren't enough ballot pledge cards or anything of that nature. And folks who tried to close the doors early for those actual precincts where people were casting their votes, the NAACP and the Legal Defense Fund came out and sued, the Secretary of State in Georgia and said, listen, you can't shut off voting places and precincts because you don't have enough power, or you don't have enough paper. This is about democracy. You have to keep those places open. And so in places like Spelman College and at places like Morehouse College, we fought, and our students, not only with the Supreme Court, with the law and the case that took place there, but also with them addressing their campus administration and their chancellors, said, listen, our students and these universities and in these institutions need to be there to be able to cast their vote, and the NAACP stood up and stood behind that. So in cases where we've seen voter disenfranchisement and voter suppression show up, the NAACP has stood up and fought those matters too. And so there's cases like that across the country that happen. We're not a law firm where we fight individual cases, but there are institutional things that the NAACP has done to protect people's right to vote and to protect people's right to protest.
And what about, going back to your organization was formed early in the last century, as well as the youth division, which you now run. How much of the history of the organization was involved with slavery, which, in name anyway, if not in name only, had been abolished some 45 years before the organization was formed? But how much of the history is involved with the fact that, from an historical perspective, slavery on paper ended in 1865,
right?
But African Americans didn't really start gaining any economic or civil rights in the South until 100 years later.
Right. So much of my job now, which there's 369 chapters that are actually in good standing. So good standing means we have 25 members or more. It means they have paid their membership dues. And it also means that they have filed their financial status with the IRS for the NAACP. So they're recognized by our organization to be a chapter of the NAACP on the local level, local or state level. The work that I do now is training, mobilizing, and empowering young Black youth across the country in over 369 chapters. We represent 700 chapters across the country, but not all of them are in good standing. And so to be in good standing with the NAACP, it means you have to have 25 members in your chapter. It means they all have to be membership dues paying members. And it also means that they file for their financial literacy for the NAACP, which gives them their IRS tax status, which allows them to use the name of the NAACP when they're doing protests or when they're hosting events so that they are covered by our tax status and our insurance. So 369 of those chapters across the country are my job to make sure that they are trained, they are empowered, and they are able to organize local and statewide and national campaigns that improve their lives for not only their chapter, but also for their community. A lot of my work, in addition to teaching about the history of the NAACP, just for the sole fact that they could understand where they come from, they can understand the legacy of the NAACP, they can understand the names of the forefathers and foremothers that they stand on the backs and shoulders of that help create the organization. In addition to that, it's about helping them pave the way to create their own new future. What are the things that we are still fighting for, that our ancestors or that our elders fought for? Next year will be the 60th anniversary for the Student Nonviolent Action Coordinating Committee. We'll be doing a conference jointly with them, with our students and the alumni and the veterans from SNCC. It's important that we go to that conference to learn with them. What are the things that you all fought for? Things like integration, quality schools, access and affordability to schools, fair housing, civil rights and civic engagement, ending mass incarceration, fairness and democracy, things of those nature that they continue to fight for, we're still fighting for. So the way that we teach them their history is, here's what they did, and here's what we learn about here's how we understand the work that they did and what we should learn about their role and then how they played it in fighting for those campaigns and those issues, and how we either do the same thing or do it differently now. And so the work that I get to do, and I have the honor of doing, is training 8-year-olds and 10-year-olds to 18-year-olds, right? What is it that you want to do as a change agent in the NAACP? How can we spark the fire of the activism, the advocacy, the protester, the leader, the social media communications person? How do we spark those talents to help move an agenda forward that not only our ancestors and forefathers fought for, but one that we want to continue to fight for so that generations after us don't have to continue to worry about?
And tell me, how do you spark that?
There's a few ways that we do that. One is our folks really love to connect to things that feel like home. So things that feel like home to our communities, our music, bringing in the talent from social media or from the entertainment industry to come and spark their interest. If one of my students doesn't really listen to or watch the Democratic debates at the Tyler Perry Studios, but they will listen to a rap artist on social media, I have to use the messenger that I know that they want to hear through to help bring the message to them, to recruit them to the work that we want to do. And once I recruit them to the work, then it's really just helping them understand why the work is important to them. So it's not just, you got to get out and vote. You got to get out and vote. Vote or die. Our ancestors died for your right to vote. Because that doesn't always move our people. It doesn't move the generation that I work with, Generation Z and the millennial generation. What does move them is if I help make clear to them, listen, there is a bill right now that's coming up that will allow people who are formerly incarcerated to get their rights to vote back. Do you know anybody who's been formerly incarcerated? And they'll say yes. I'm going to say, well, do you think it's fair that they don't get the right to vote after they have served their time? And they'll say no. I'll say, well, if you vote for this bill, this amendment, it'll help change that institutionally. Oh, so now it's personal. Or if I say to them, listen, if we elect this person who also has the power to elect the next police chief, and you think police brutality is a problem in your community, we can help make structural changes and find somebody in office who will help make fair appointments and fair decisions. And maybe we can see a different culture shift in our communities when it comes to ending police brutality. If I make it personal for people once I recruit them, then the mind and the spark for themselves is organic. I don't have to fight too hard to get them to move. The next question becomes, what can I do about it? And it's, okay, great. I don't want just you to vote. I want you to bring 5 people with you to the polls. I don't want just you to vote. I want you to make sure that your university is going to have somebody who can help institute the census so that it's fair at your school and your university, so that folks can have the access to resources that we need and they can get counted. Things like that help inspire people. So it's about the messaging, and it's also about making it personal.
Mm-hmm. And what effect has the Trump presidency had on young African Americans getting politically active and involved?
Sorry, I laughed. Sometimes you laugh when you're triggered. Here's what I will say. I think I will never say that what has happened and with the Trump administration has been good for us in the work that we do. I will never say that because it's not. There's violence that has come from the administration that has hurt our communities, not only in the present tense, but in the future to come. But I think it has awakened people's mind to the role that the White House plays, the role that Congress plays, and especially the role that the Supreme Court plays in making decisions that impact our communities and other communities of color on a daily basis. I say that not just because it's political, but also because there have been ways that violence has showed up personally for people. It has divided our country. It has created very, very, very sharp, and I say sharp intentionally because it's dangerous, very sharp polarization on campuses across the country. I have students who, in Florida last year, had a Mexican party where they created a wall, and in order for you to get into the party, you had to jump over the wall. And the Black Student Union reached out to the MECHA, which is the Latinx student organization on campus, and they formed a coalition and said, listen, this is not right. And any attack on communities that are immigrants, which is also a Black people's issue, is an attack on all students of color. And you can't bring that hate speech to our school and expect us to go to class and feel safe. So that type of stirring of personal hate that happens is coming directly from the White House. It's coming directly from Donald Trump's mouth. He is ensuring it, and he's also not he's making it seem like it's okay. He's actually affirming and legitimizing the hate crimes and the hate violence and the hate speech that we see at our schools. You see Richard Spencer traveling across the country to a lot of schools that HBCU chapters are on, NAACP chapters are on, and you're watching our students go head to head in conversation, but there is a racial violence.
In conversation, what do you mean?
In conversation with white supremacists on campus, with white nationalists on campus, with the alt-right on campus, with different political parties that are on campus who agree with the language and the narrative and the agenda, more importantly, of Richard Spencer, who comes to their school. And so it has made the climate of campuses worse. It has made the trauma and violence of the everyday life, I think, of an African American at an institution that is predominantly white. I went to a predominantly white university, University of California, Santa Cruz. It makes that experience violent. You can't go to class and expect to learn about macroecon when you're worried about somebody hanging a noose on your campus, right? Mm-hmm. And so that language that this presidency has created and allowed, I think, has made it hard. It has reignited some of the fire that I think folks who were tired or just really apathetic to come back into the work. And it also has challenged my chapters of the NAACP to think differently and more radically about how they approach this work. And what I mean by that is instead of doing a panel or instead of having a petition, we need to have some face-to-face conversations. We need to have some real conversations where thought leaders and decision makers come to the table and say, what side are you actually on? Because they can't have a conversation about race and support what Richard Spencer is doing or say what Donald Trump has done is okay and still be for racial solidarity, equality, equity, and about supporting the Black students at their university.
As we're speaking, we're heading into an election year, and a lot has been said about the fact that young African Americans, young women and young men, were energized to come out and vote for Obama, and not so much for Hillary Clinton. Do you think you're going to need more energy, or is the Trump presidency alone enough energy to get those people out and vote one way or the other?
Interesting. Good question. I don't think that young Black voters at this time need anything more than what we've been doing. I think the problem that we're finding is our candidates aren't speaking to the issues that we care most deeply about. So the question becomes for me, if young Black folks decide that they're going to turn out, who are they turning out for and what are they turning out for? And they need that. We are focused on making sure that people have access to the polls, people have fair access to the polls. There's voter disenfranchisement right now with campus IDs and getting a proper ID to go to the polls and be able to cast your ballot. There are thousands of students who file absentee who are not receiving their absentee ballots. And so we're focused on making sure that we sort that stuff out now before we get to next year. But I think that the candidates at this point, are still having challenges resonating and speaking to an audience that they think either does or does not matter. And if they think it doesn't matter, that charges a larger problem to the country. And we recognize that, right? I'm 30 years old now. But the generations that I work with and the kids that I work with, they recognize when people are ignoring them, because we have been demanding, right, that Black Lives Matter. We have been demanding that we want free education. We want to demand that we alleviate all student debt. We demand that we be able to have safe access to our schools when we go to our schools and not worry about a police officer slamming children to the ground. We want more counselors on campus than we do police officers. We want our parents to have fair payable jobs, right? And we want to be able to get to school safely. All these things that we have an agenda around. We want equity for LGBTQI, SGL communities. We want, the list goes on. We want fair access for women to choose what they're going to do with their own bodies, and healthcare with women's reproductive choice. We want those things now, and those are part of our agendas. But if folks aren't speaking directly to, and I say folks, candidates, are not speaking directly to our young Black folks, we pay attention to that, and then we vote in our best interest and our best favor. We don't vote because a party tells us to vote a certain way. We don't vote because it's our only option. We vote because it's going to help us. And so I think that the energy that we're going to see into 2020 is, we know what we don't want. Where are the options of who is speaking to us closer, and who's going to help us achieve liberation in the best way possible, and will not most importantly ignore us once they get elected, right? And not use our vote.
So are you talking about independent candidates in some
Not
circumstances?
at all. I'm thinking that we still have time right now for candidates to adjust and shift how they're approaching talking to different audiences.
Are they just flat out not talking to Black audiences? Is that how you see it?
No, I don't think they're ignoring Black audiences. I think that there are some issues that they are too scared to address. We have not seen things around mass incarceration on these debate stages. We have not seen things around bailout reform on these stages. We have not seen things about outside of the LGBTQ community getting same marriage equality. There are other issues that our communities care about, like health and education on campuses, and ending the hate crimes against trans women.
But there's been a lot of talk by some of the Democratic candidates about free college tuition, about free Medicare for, health care for all. Aren't those two major issues?
Those are two, but I think those are for everyone. There are issues that Black young folks have been talking about. Police brutality is a huge one, obviously. Mm-hmm. And young Black leaders have been leading that movement over the last 5 to 6 years. And we still have seen people tiptoeing around solutions to the issue. And so unless we see candidates come out and speak with our local, not national entertainers, local leaders who do this work on the ground every single day, who are on campuses, who are registering other voters, who are young Black people who are fighting for amendments and local races, if they're not talking to them specifically and we see them addressing and talking to the trusted leadership, then we can't trust or align ourselves with any political party, one, which we're not going to do, or any political candidate who is saying that they are reaching out to the young Black audience.
So as we've talked about all these problems that are going on and that you're addressing in the community. What do you want people to do in 2020 about it?
Great question. There are a few things that people can do. The first that I tell folks to do, because I travel across the country and speak to young folks all the time, is they have to fact check their sources. You would think that would be a no-brainer, but in today's age, folks get their news and media from social media, and that isn't always the most trusted, reliable source. So as we are making decisions, personally in the ballot box, or as leaders of our organizations, we have to make sure that we are fact checking our sources and information and where we gather our ideas to establish ourselves in our value set and stay committed to our value set means that we have to fact check who, why they're saying it, what they're saying, and how it's going to impact our community. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would ask folks to do is to join an organization. We can do a lot more when we are organized collectively. And as someone who's been doing this work for 12 years, I find that folks are most effective when they're working in coalitions with people in their own communities and folks across issue lines. So that means joining an NAACP on the local level. That means joining your Planned Parenthood chapter at your school. It means joining United We Dream in your community. It means joining all these different organizations so that you can align yourselves with people who think about an agenda the same way that you do and who are taking concrete steps to create real change in your community and in people's lives. Not trying to do everything on your own. It's joining an organization. And then the last thing I would say that people should do is there are a lot of people in this country that folks can have hard conversations with, but the most important people that we should be talking to are the folks in our closest circles. We often think that because they're in our family or because they're our closest friends, that we all feel the same way about these political issues. And I'd venture to say that we don't. It's really necessary that my mom hears about my constructive criticism on immigration policy or DACA from her daughter and not from someone on the bus. Right? Because she'll receive it differently. It's really important that our teachers in our schools have tough conversations with the administrations or with their students because that is the atmosphere in which they create those conversations and not someone on social media where they're fighting in their Facebook comments, right? It's important for us to have those conversations because that is how we're going to continue to help redirect the compass of this country and will help us figure out who is the best candidate, and most importantly, what is the best direction for our government overall in 2020? It's not just about one candidate. So those three things, right? It's fact checking, joining an organization, and having those really tough conversations with people who are really close to you. If we can all commit to doing that, we could probably change the country overnight.
Now, one last question. You've been talking a lot about organizing on college campuses. I don't know the number for African Americans. I should, but I know that 1 in 3 Americans of all, no matter what color or gender, they go to start college, I should say, at least attend 1 year of community college. I would imagine the number for African Americans is lower than that. So most of your constituency aren't even going to campuses. How are you reaching them?
Yeah, so 70% of millennials aren't even on campuses right now. That's only 30% of millennials. There's a few ways we do that. One, we have to find out where those folks mobilize. Where do they gather? Where do they convene? It's not just churches. They actually don't go to church that much anymore. It's at their job and at their workplace. It's also figuring out how do we use the 30% that we do have, who do know how to mobilize, who have the capacity on a campus or at a school to create organization, and how do they leave the campus walls and go visit folks in the community and knock on doors and visit people at their homes and at their jobs. And so the NAACP Youth and College Division did that last year in the 2018 election cycle, where we saw our students rent vans and drive and canvass and talk to people and have real tough conversations at their front door, and then register people at the door, and then come back and give them pamphlets so that they can read more about, their voting guide so that they can make educated and informed decisions at the ballot box. And so we're going to repeat that mechanism and we're going to expand that tactic again for 2020. It is necessary that we do work outside of schools with millennials because we know that 70% of us aren't even there. And so the work that we're doing not only helps with the agenda of course, the NAACP and the values that we set, but it also grows the membership. When our NAACP leaders can go knock on a door and say, hey, are you registered to vote? And also, are you an NAACP member? We get 2 birds in 1 stone. It's great.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
Best of luck to you in everything you do in
Thank you
2020
so much.
And beyond.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for your time.
Absolutely.
That's it for this edition of To the Contrary. Please follow me on Twitter and visit our website, pbs.org/To the Contrary. And whether you agree or think to the contrary, see you next week.